I was putting my family and my feeling on hold to come and do what I thought was right.
I have you hold it up or online.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really hard time. Sorry.
Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry. No. But there's also a lot of really good things that I met a lot of amazing people throughout the process. So we met with the district attorney's office. They kind of gave me a timeline of what to expect, when to expect, and then they gave me Brandon's pamphlet. And so I met with Brandon and his organization, and that was the first time it's like, this is what you're going through, and these are the next steps you need to do, because many homicide victims or the survivors of homicide, like there's not a guideline of like step by step what you're supposed to do the next day. Like, who am I supposed to call? How am I supposed to get access to her bank? How am I supposed to get access to anything that I'm supposed to do the next day? And Brandon and his group really just laid that out for me. They would meet with me before I go to the DA's office and say, hey, this is what they're going to talk to you about today. This is what you can expect. Or they would let me know, like, I think this is going to be canceled. So like, don't let it humble you if you're planning on this happening and it doesn't this week, which happens all the time. And, you know, you go with the flow, you're already in a state that you have no control in this situation. You have no control what's going to happen. But if you can have communication about what happens next, it makes all the difference in the world. So I would just say, if you're dealing with any survivors, the best thing you could do for them is just communicate with them and let them know even the next day what's going to happen, because you're just in a constant state of dealing with your grief and your trauma and all the things of losing the person that you love, and then also trying to put all the pieces of how to find them justice together, and oftentimes not feeling listened to, not feeling like, you know, their memories being respected, or I always felt like people were hiding things from me because they didn't think I was strong enough to handle what they were going to tell me, or like they just wanted to protect. But I was like, my brain is coming up with so many variations of what could be. If you would just tell me what is, I could just take that and move forward. So I would just communicate and don't try to hide. And, you know, because you see that and you just think, what really is going on? So I met with Brandon. It was such a profound impact on me that I wanted to be part of what he was doing and be part of something that helps other people that go through something that I went through, because it happens far too often. So that's a little bit of my story. If you guys have any questions, I'm here, and I'm more than happy to field any of those.
Before you ask questions, we just want to remind you, don't worry about asking, or not don't worry, just don't ask details about the case specifically, but just experiences and things like that.
So if you have any questions. Yeah.
When they came to, I can know.
When they came to tell you about your sister, did they bring a victim advocate with them?
I'm gonna get my exercise today, guys.
You know, I don't think so. There were two people with them. There was the detective and I think whoever else was, but the other person really didn't say much, said maybe one or two things to me. And the only card I got was for the detective that night. So it was a really bad night. What they told me was something you never want to hear, but I think the way they told me was really challenging to process as well, because I didn't feel like they cared about what they were telling me. I felt like it was just we got to get this out. I mean, they told me in the doorway. I opened the door and he said, hey, your sister was shot and killed tonight. And yeah, I hadn't even sat down. I had no like realm of who he was. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was just like, you for sure have the wrong door. My sister's decorating cookies last night. Like, this isn't. And then, you know, we sat down and he told me more information, but very, very little information. And I got way more information on KSL an hour later than I did with him in my house.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your story with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Let's go here and then.
I'm just curious, other than, communicating and validating you and that kinds of things, what were things that either like advocates or law enforcement or just people in your life did that you feel like helped validate you the most and were like the most trauma informed, like things that they said or did, or just things that helped you feel supported and listened to?
I think the things that made me feel most supported and listened to were when I just felt that someone was there to actually talk to me and not just get me out of there and it's a challenging thing to talk about. Like, I know it's really uncomfortable for everyone there. It's not easy to see someone in a really acute stage of their grief and know how to talk to them and know like, oh no, what am I gonna say? Is it gonna make it worse? Is it gonna make it better? So like, I'm not gonna say much. But really, I think people that would just answer my questions made all the difference in the world. Like, that's all I wanted, were my questions answered. And then people that acknowledged my sister. I remember when I met at the DA's office, the prosecutor came in, she met me, she's like, I'm here for you, but I'm here for your sister. And that's what we're here for. And she just made it all about my sister. It wasn't about me. And I really appreciated that because I was like, we're not here for me, we're here for her. And so that was, I remember that moment just being like, I'm so grateful that we have this person on our team. So thank you for your question.
So thank you so much for coming over and sharing this with us. And I believe that we were part of that story also. Unfortunately, we were not able to continue being in contact with the family. This case was referred to a different agency, and it was not with the agency where this happened, did not continue assisting the family. This a conflict of interest, but at least two of us that are here today were there that night. And yeah, it impacts the victims advocates too. So sorry for your loss so many years later. But yeah, victim advocates really care. And we wish we could done more for your family, but we were there.
And one unique thing, if I can talk a little bit about Becca, is her family all lives in southern Utah, northern Arizona. So it was just her and her sister in North Utah County together. And so that was another thing.
I really appreciate that comment because that was one of the hardest things for me is the department that answered the call, then there was a conflict of interest and they never told us what the conflict was or anything. And so I just felt like it kind of got jumbled around. But that was something for me that I always wanted to know, when somebody that was there that night and that could have told me, anything about what happened, I would have. Anyway, that was one thing that caused me a lot of like post-traumatic stress and a lot of just recreating that night over and over in my head of like what all the different things that could have happened or how she was. But no one could answer those questions for me. So I'm really grateful you guys are here. Thank you so much.
And I'm sorry, but unfortunately, we were there and we're still here.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Right, well, thank you all. And I kind of went over kind of things that went poorly, but there were also so many amazing people day in and day out that made a big difference for me on a daily basis. Victims advocates that helped us write letters, that just sent texts to see like how we were doing. And the thing that mattered so much to me is when someone would promise something and then follow through with it. That you know, we're hanging on tiny little threads of just anything. So it's, you know, when you're writing your victim impact statement for the judge, if you would say like, hey, I'm willing to help you write this, or I'll review your papers. And then they'd reach out and be like, you're ready, like I want to read that. And just follow through with what you promised makes all the difference in the world, because that's those things are all we have at that time. So, and a lot of you did really, really well with that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Becca, please. Okay, so we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty here. Let's see what. Can't find my, there it is. Okay. All right, so my name is Brandon Merrill. I'm the executive director and the founder of Utah Homicide Survivors. We're going to talk all about what homicide survivors, aka the family and friends of the homicide victim, needs immediately after the homicide occurs. And I'm more going to talk about the legal aspects of it because I'm an attorney. And then Maria later will talk about the therapy and social services and things like that. So a little bit about me. I graduated from Vermont Law School in early 2016. I was with a group called the Never Again Foundation. They were based out of Phoenix, starting with an internship in May 2015. I volunteered for them on and off. And then in 2018, summer of 2018, I moved up here to open a chapter of theirs. Unfortunately, things happened, so we split off from them and we started up our own organization called Utah Homicide Survivors. It's a similar name to what a lot of organizations out throughout the country have with this. Most of them, I should say about 99% of them, are purely therapy-based or support group-based focused. Only one other organization provides any type of legal services, but their legal services are very limited compared to what we do. All right, so let's talk about our main focus, our specialty is domestic violence deaths. So we have, sorry, I keep hearing myself reverb in my computer and it's throwing me off here a little bit. But so Utah experiences a pretty low amount of homicides per year. But unfortunately, the number of domestic violence homicides in at least percentage-wise is quite high. So last year there was about 95 homicides in the state of Utah. That is including justified self-defense. I don't include those as far as my percentage go. So if there was 90 homicides and 10 of them were self-defense justified, I wouldn't count that towards the overall number within my percentages. Anyway, I calculate my percentages different than the state, and even UBC does a little bit, but the numbers are accurate. So of those 95, we had 35 domestic violence related killings. And each year they're a little bit different. 2020, we had a high, we hit triple digit homicides for the first time as a state, and above 90 for the first time as a state. And with that, again, higher amount of domestic violence related killings, but the percentages stayed the same. So overall, Utah gets about 30.3 domestic violence related killings each year. And that is about 43% of all homicides that occur within the state of Utah, which is very high. It's much higher than the national average. The national average sticks between 25 and 28% of domestic violence related killings. So Utah specific, 88% of domestic violence homicide perpetrators are male. So when I give experiences or examples of things that are going to happen throughout the presentation, I will likely keep saying he. Sorry to the gentlemen here who are male. That's just how it's going to be. Firearm is used in about 60% of the cases. 40%, I'm averaging up here, of perpetrators had a criminal domestic violence history. That to me is very unique, meaning the majority don't have any criminal domestic violence history. So there isn't a lot of warning necessarily that things are escalating this way. 22% of these homicides, or of these murderers, sorry, were previously ordered treatment by the court. As you all know, up until this year, I mean, and we still don't technically have it. That can be anything from just an anger management class to, you know, extended stays or continued therapy. There was no generalized, or not generalized, but there was no set of way to treat somebody who was ordered treatment by the courts. Now, thankfully, to new legislation, that's going to start happening, which is a great thing, because then we can actually see if that will help. In about 1/5 or 22% of the cases, children are either involved or witnesses to the homicide. So that is another alarming statistic that many, especially within domestic violence cases, they have witnessed it. 34%, or about 1/3 of perpetrators, die by suicide after the homicide. And then each homicide is estimated to have at least 3 to 10 survivors. In Utah, we have a little bit higher than average compared to most states. It's usually about 7. And what we count as a survivor, at least for a primary survivor, that is the children, the parents, and the siblings, as well as the spouse, if the spouse is not involved in the actual homicide. So as I'm going through all of this, please feel free to raise hand, answer questions while I'm in the middle of it. I want that because it's going to help. I don't want to wait until the end for questions because I'm not going to remember what I said. My severe ADHD is not going to allow that to happen. I'll bounce around all the time. So it will help me if you ask the questions right away. Otherwise, it might not be as good of an answer later on. So again, who are homicide survivors? We include, at least for people that we will provide services for, not just only legal services, but our social services and therapy services, as spouses and partners, children, parents, other relatives, and then friends and coworkers. And we include those people because they still are suffering in one way or another, and they might not need all the legal services or any legal services, some of them, but they still need maybe therapy or other social services, and so we try to help them with that. Especially for ones that may not qualify to get therapy from crime victims reparations, we will allow them to join the group if they meet the qualifications that we have. Yes. Hold on. Let's run over here.
So does there have to be a criminal charge of homicide or family, friends, and so forth to connect with your agency and get that assistance?
That's a really good question. Before, it would have depended on the circumstances. Recently, we have had a very big influx of cases, so there doesn't need to be criminal charges. We require at least either the death certificate or a police finding that a homicide has occurred. So especially in a murder-suicide case, there's not going to be a criminal charge because the perpetrator is deceased. And so we will take those cases, but we need some kind of determination. We used to be able to have a little bit more flexibility, but unfortunately our caseload, I mean, I can tell you in August, we had 16 intakes, which is quite a bit. We usually get, and not all of those were accepted, but we usually get about 25 to 30 new cases in a year. And these cases take us 6 months to almost, we're on year 4 with some of Becca's cases. So they can take us a long time. But yeah, good question. So it just depends. They're welcome to call. We'll do an intake and we'll be able to say, hey, yes, we can help you if it's legal services or not, or hey, this place might be a better option for you. Because sometimes while they may not rise to the level of a homicide, it could be a negligent manslaughter or something like that. There's resources out there for them that we'll try to connect them with. All right, so. Okay, I'm just hearing myself reverb all over the place. Sorry, guys. All right, so our mission as an organization is to ensure that killers do not financially profit from murder. We use the civil legal process to hold killers financially accountable to their victims. And we want to help victims of crime and their surviving families obtain hope, justice, and healing. Now, I know what you're thinking, Brandon, the Salt Lake District Attorney basically recycled your motto right there, because they have justice, hope, and healing. I tried to talk to them about it, but it's fine, no, I didn't really care. But we're using the same thing here, so that just shows how we got a good little slogan there. Okay. All right, so I want to start with an introductory video of a family. This happened in Salt Lake City 2020, early 2020. And we'll see how my sound chooses to cooperate or not. Oh, see, this is why we have this problem here. Let's go back. Let's try this.
Natalie, when she was younger, she got into the terrible twos and never got out of the terrible twos. But Natalie has been loving her whole adult life. Just an awesome girl.
Everybody loved Natalie. She was the life of the party. Always making sure, checking on people, making sure all of her friends knew that they were cared about and that they were loved. And that was, like, I feel like one of her best attributes.
When you get into things like this, you have no idea what you're up against, what you need to take care of.
Yeah.
Finding out what she has, bank account, taxes, just everything personal, that where do you go to find them things? And
I don't know. No, that was the end of it, apparently. Okay, so this family was referred to us from the Salt Lake District Attorney's Office after their daughter was killed. And they came to us very lost because, while they knew their daughter pretty well, obviously it's their child, and they were very involved, but they didn't know, who she banked with. They didn't know if she had retirement accounts. They didn't know, if she had multiple vehicles that were just in her name. They didn't know if she had credit card debt. They didn't know all that kind of stuff. I mean, as an adult person, I can say my parents don't know any of that stuff. I don't tell them where my bank accounts are or my retirement accounts might be. But they may not know where to go. And so they were referred to us literally within a week and a half of the homicide occurring. And because of that, we were able to help them quite a bit. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a second. But the big thing is, you guys can't see that at the very top, but it says keeping the perpetrator from profiting from murder, helping families with becoming a rightful beneficiary, receiving life insurance proceeds, debt relief for estates, victims compensation, probate, wrongful death, economic restabilization, and then other things that are necessary as a result of the homicide. Now, you might see this and go, wait, you do divorces? Kinda, but it's only when it's a result of the homicide that it needs to happen. So an example would be one parent kills a child. They do not want to stay married to that parent anymore or their spouse anymore. So we will help them with the divorce. We don't duplicate services anywhere else. I won't take a regular divorce case. I don't take other types of cases. Very rarely, some of you here know that I'm a sucker for a lost puppy if it's not related to the homicide. But because of our capacity we're way over. My staff have started to yell at me and say I can't take anything other than homicide stuff. And that's just because of the great support that we've gotten, not just from victim advocates, but from the community as well. So let's talk about how killers can profit from murder. This is where I need some audience participation. I'm not going to run to you because it's way too far. I'll just repeat the answer back. But how can killers profit from murder? Life insurance, right? And you're like, wait, Brandon, I have seen every single episode of Law and Order, and I know that they can't get the life insurance. That's why they always say they try to make it look like a suicide, right? Well, let me tell you, that's technically true. Killers cannot profit from murder. But where do you think that happens? Where do we stop the killers from profiting from murder? Anybody?
Social security benefits for children.
But how do we stop it? I'm saying, how do we stop the killer from getting the life insurance? Where do we go for that? Criminal court? Well, but if you go to a judge in the criminal court and you say, hey, judge, this guy's stealing my money, what's the judge gonna say? Sorry, it's a civil matter, right? So it happens within the probate court. Okay, probate means like the estate, the stuff that handles all the ancillary stuff, nothing that involves criminal. It's the criminal code is embedded into what we will later talk about, the Slayer statute within the state of Utah, and that's what says killers can't profit from murder. Okay, what else? I heard Social Security benefits. That's a way that they could potentially profit because they can claim them as a widower or if they're still taking care of the kids or trying to claim it on behalf of the kids. I don't think that's my next one, so I'm not clicking it. No offense. So what else? Oh, yes. Writing a book, trying to publicize a book, right? I'm not gonna click on it again because it's not next, but O.J. Simpson wrote When I Did It. I mean, if I did it. I've been telling that joke for 4 years now. I don't care. I'm gonna keep telling you. Yeah, and or like the paintings, there's also that with John Wayne Gacy, but Jodi Arias in Arizona, she also was trying to do the same thing. I can't talk about that case now. Yes. Real estate, right? Property, things like that. Yep. So who's married or has a home joint owner with somebody else, joint tenancy, right? So if you own a home, likely it's joint tenant with your spouse or partner or heck, even sibling. And so what the court will do is they'll make it so they can't profit from that. And we'll go into even more detail on that. What else? I think we kind of went into it a second ago. So I'm just going to keep clicking. Business interests. A lot of people list their spouses or partners or friends or whatever. Because again, the killer can't profit. That's from any aspect of the probate code. So if a business partner killed another one, they could inherit the entirety of the business. What else? Bank accounts. Who's got joint bank accounts with their spouse or listed them as a beneficiary? Retirement accounts, same kind of thing. Vehicles, also same kind of thing, joint vehicle ownership. And then finally, book deals. So there's lots of other ways too, book deals, movie rights, but there's other ways that people can profit as well from killing. But these are the main ways that it tends to happen. So we're gonna play another little clip here, and I'm sorry for the audio delay in here. Just listen to the words and try not to focus on the mouth moving 3 seconds afterwards. So.
By the same man who killed their daughter, Edward Kellison is serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of his wife, Melanie, back in 2014. And behind every crime, there's a story and the truth that matters. And in tonight's Justice Files, ABC4's Marcos Ortiz shows how a loophole in the law is hurting families of victims.
In Utah, it's against the law for a killer to profit from one's crime. But some claim the killer's own family can reap benefits. That's why Melanie Kellison's family wants the law changed.
But she seemed to be really happy with him, and she'd already had a pretty rough life, and so we had tried to support her in any way that we possibly could.
But in 2014, at Devil's Willow Patch, the same campsite where the couple was pictured, Richville police came upon a grisly scene. Authorities say Melanie Kellison was dismembered and burned beyond recognition.
And I was hysterical. Absolutely hysterical.
After weeks of alibis, her new husband, Edward Kellison, confessed to that ghastly murder.
He did kill her, and he dismembered her and he burned her. And then I was really, I still to this day can't get my head around that.
The judge sentenced Kellison to life in prison, but Kellison wasn't finished. Melanie's family was awarded $2 million in a wrongful death lawsuit.
I knew that Melanie would have wanted her nieces to have had a good education. and that was part of our thoughts.
But to date, they never received 1 penny from Callison. While in jail, Callison signed over his property to his first wife, sheltering all his assets.
Melanie's family, they went through all the proper steps.
That's me.
Brandon Merrill is an attorney with Never Again Foundation. He claims Utah's so-called Slayer statute, which prevents killers from profiting from a crime, doesn't stop the killer from transferring assets.
What we really want is to make sure that the family is able to receive justice. And that justice can't be received if the killer is able to transfer away property and assets to people he would rather see get the money.
It may be too late for Melanie Callison's family, but they want lawmakers to pay attention to what happened in Richfield.
But we still, in the back of our minds, still wondered, is there something somewhere, somehow, where we could help someone else?
The attorney for the family wants lawmakers to change the law so it resembles Arizona's. He says there, once the trigger is pulled, the assets are frozen. For the Justice Files, Marcus Ortiz, ABC4 News.
Okay, so this family did a lot of things correctly. They went, they found, this is way before I got to you, I know you saw me on TV, but I wasn't officially their attorney on this, but they went and got a big giant judgment, right? You saw that $2 million, but before they got the judgment, he had transferred the property away. And yes, there are laws that maybe you could claw it back, but by the time that they could even try to claw it back, the property had been sold. And so by then, the cash was pretty much impossible to find or trace or go and get. And so they were not able to act quick enough to be able to do this. They started their wrongful death lawsuit over a year after the homicide had occurred, and that's what gave him the time to be able to go and do all of this stuff. And so he made it so that the victim's family couldn't get what they were entitled to. So let's talk about the legal needs for families. The main one, the first one, for most of them, it's the only one, is probate. And in probate, like I said before, that's where we handle the estate of the person that has been killed. And so what happens in probate, you get somebody appointed to be the personal representative. They act as if they are the estate. They go, they gather assets. They sometimes have to pay debt. Sometimes they need to go in and access bank account. They can transfer the car titles. They can transfer home titles. They can gather and claim life insurance and other injury policies. Okay, so that's mainly what happens within probate. Now, this debt right here, that is a big thing of why it is so important to get somebody appointed as a personal representative quickly. So there's this provision. For example, there's a person who was deceased. He owed, I think it was something like $60,000 to the state of Utah for medical bills that he incurred from surgery and things like that. And it was from before he was killed. So he was making payments, but he was killed, so those payments stopped. When we were contacted, we got somebody appointed as a personal representative, and we published this notice in the newspaper. And this notice says, hey, creditors of John Doe, if John Doe owed you money, you need to come to court within 3 months or else you can't get any money. Okay, without publishing that in the newspaper, the timeline is 1 year. Okay, so they either get 3 months or 1 year to come in from the 3 months from the day of the notice or 1 year from the date of the death to come in and try to claim any debts that might happen. And so we published that very quickly. I think it was, the person died in January. It was either March or April that we got that published in the newspaper. So they had up until the end of July, early August to come in and say, hey, John Doe owed us some money. Well, they didn't appear. So we were getting ready to close because we had to wait to get other assets transferred over. And like I said, most of our cases take a minimum of 6 months, but more often the probate cases take us about a year. And that we were closing up basically at the 1 year mark. And who should appear but the state of Utah? They say, hey, we are 1 day before the 1 year mark of this death. We are here, and John Doe owes us $60,000 plus interest, plus attorney fees, plus all these other things. And I said, hey, nope, get out of here. And the judge agreed. The judge said, look, you followed the process, you published in the newspaper, you said that they had to appear by this time, they did not appear. And so the state of Utah did not come in and take that $60,000 from the family. And so that was able to go towards taking care of kids, taking, helping them with their economic restabilization and other things like that. So that's why it is so important to try to get them to, I would prefer, people say, hey, call Brandon, that's great. But even not, other attorneys or other people need to know you've got to get appointed as a personal representative and publish that in the newspaper pretty quickly. And that applies to any type of death, not just homicides. So it's important to know. Also, we make sure that they don't pay credit card debt of the person, especially if it was just in their name. So on assets like homes and cars, we want to pay those debts because those are assets that can be used in the future. But if it's a credit card debt, credit card companies, they're not hurting. Like a little secret there, I used to work for them. They're not hurting. And so if the credit card was just in the name of the deceased, oftentimes people are worried, like, oh, they're going to come and try to take all of this stuff. And no, that's not how that works. Again, they either need to appear very quickly within that 3-month time period, but they don't get to charge the personal representative from their own assets. They can take from the estate. So let's say there's not very much within the estate. There's exemptions, there's ways to work around. But we want to make sure that as much as we can goes over to the victims. And then if nothing else, I shamelessly pull the, hey, this person was killed and they've got, little kids or wife or parents or whatever. Do you really want to take this money from them? And most of the time they just go away and then they don't do it. So the only people that I cannot get rid of is utility companies. Don't ask me why. They will show up in court for a $3 bill. I am not joking. That really happened. They paid an attorney probably $300-400 to appear in court. They wanted their $3. They got it. It wasn't like 3, it was like 16, but still, it was $16. All right. The other main thing that people want is wrongful death. Now, this portion of the presentation is not funded by UOVC or other grant things, but I'm just going to click through it really quickly. But basically, yes, we do it, but not on our federally grant funded time. Sometimes we refer it out to other law firms. If you want to ask me more about that, you can either call our office or email us or talk to me afterwards. So yes, all right, next slide.
Well, a Salt Lake City father who beat his wife to death with a crowbar and seriously injured his 13-year-old daughter will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Walter Brantzeg was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He pleaded guilty last month to a deal that spared him his death penalty. Now, Brantzeg was in the middle of a bitter custody dispute last August with his estranged wife when police say he kicked in the front door of her apartment and attacked her and his daughter with a crowbar and pepper spray.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I should have given the trigger warning at the beginning of this. I use real life examples, real life cases, and I refer to the killer as the killer or the murderer. And that is because I don't want to diminish what they have done. It is in my opinion, the worst of the worst crime. They have taken somebody's life. And so I will continue to use that kind of language. If you need to walk out because this is triggering, that's totally fine, please do. But I will continue to refer to them as the murderer or the killer. And some of these clips, like you have heard, have gone into a little bit more detail, but they were news clips, and so that's kind of why we use those, just to give the examples that we can. Otherwise, I want to make sure that we respect the family's privacy. So not all of them have come forward. I don't use examples of cases that happened in the news, in case you're wondering. So, all right. So here's some more legal needs. When there is just like in the news clip, there was a child that survived, and the mother was killed. The father is the one who killed the mother. They are going to jail or prison for the rest of their life. Who's going to take care of this 14-year-old girl? And so that's a big part. That's what the guardianship is. Who's going to take care of them? We need to make sure we find the right and appropriate people. And I can tell you, we don't pick or I should say we don't pick. Sometimes the right people aren't always referred to us. We've had people that have been referred to us that weren't the right fit as the guardians. And we might represent them at the beginning, and then after finding out, hey, this is not going to be the right fit, we'll withdraw from our representation. So if you have heard anything like that, there are reasons we withdraw from representation, and that's just because it's not the right fit. Our thing is we want to make sure first that the kids are taken care of. And if we feel like this is not in the kid's best interest, then we'll make sure that we try to correct that. Guardianship is over the person. Who can tell me what a conservatorship is for? Right? Everybody knows about Britney Spears now. So over here, Britney Spears, it's all over the news. Conservatorship, it's all the financial, the money, how their assets are managed. And so in a case, for instance, there was a benefit to the little girl, an injury policy that was on her just through the perpetrator's work, actually. And first, he tried to claim that injury policy. He tried to go and collect that. And we were able to thankfully stop it because we found that paperwork. We contacted Aflac. Can't say Aflac without doing the quack part, but we contacted them. We said, hey, this person caused the injury of this person. If they try to collect on this policy, do not pay out, just hold it. And they called us up within, I think, 24 hours of getting our facts, telling them, hey, don't pay this out. And said, hey, you just filed a claim last week, actually. We were starting to process the paperwork. And this story wasn't, the victim and the perpetrator were not named by at least their full names within the news. And so it wouldn't have been an easy one to look up to see, oh, yes, he did this. Later, there was a lot more news stories with it, but they were able to pause that, and we were able to get that money over for the little girl's care. And so that conservatorship, that's who, that money is there, it's protected. It's a court-ordered conservatorship or court-monitored conservatorship, so they can't even withdraw money without asking the court for permission. And then we will also go and we'll help them let the Social Security survivors benefits. If the parent was working at the time of their death, or even if it wasn't so recently, but if they have enough credits, they can receive anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a month from Social Security up until they're 18 years old. And so that really can help take care of the child. And so we will go through and help them apply. It's very easy to do, but it's just a lot of time waiting on the phone to get an appointment to talk to somebody in a couple of months. The wait times on it is easily an hour or more. You can, in your Lisa, you can ask them and they will tell you that that's their worst day of the week is when they need to call Social Security. All right, and then domestic violence homicides, they are a special category of consideration, and that's why we need to do a few things. The first thing is we need to disinherit the killer as an heir. That's part of the Slayer statute. Utah's Slayer statute has recently changed, but we'll go over it a little bit more. But how the courts view profit is maybe different than how I would view profit. So if, for instance, I own a home and my spouse is attached to the home and I kill my spouse kills me, whoever, what the courts will do is they will say, the killer can't profit, right? So what would you think the profit is within that home? Is it the whole house? Is it my half of the house? Is it their half of the house? And what courts will basically do is they'll say, we're going to treat this like a divorce action, all the assets get divided down the middle. So you have, let's say $100,000 divided down the middle, they can't gain that $50,000, that's profit. But the $50,000 that they do get to keep, that's theirs, that's not profit according to the court. I don't like that. And so that's partially where wrongful death and things like that kind of get into place. Or potentially child support, that's a big one where we try to get the child support paid in advance with that lump sum that might be left over. There are certain impenetrable assets, and up until recently, they were almost totally impenetrable, and that is retirement accounts. You might have heard back when the O.J. Simpson thing was going on, the family got a big giant judgment against O.J. Simpson, right? The families of Nicole and Goldman, Ron Goldman. They went and they got a big judgment against OJ, and he's got a big NFL pension, right? And so they went in and tried to take it, but the courts ruled you can't touch pensions and retirement accounts. That's mostly because the government doesn't want to be taking care of these people. So you don't let them to allow them to touch it. But now there is an exception. You can touch retirement accounts if it's for child support. And so that's another way around that. Murder suicides are also a very unique area. And the basic unique issues, I don't need to go into all of it, but what we will do is we will make claims against the estate of the killer, depending on how closely they died together, or things like that. The assets get really commingled. And so we want to make sure, first of all, that the kids are taken care of. That's our main thing. If there aren't any kids, then I'm an attorney. I take the side of the victim's family in that case, and we do and get all that we can for them. So sometimes it means, we get most of it if we don't have to go to court and go through 2 years just to try to get all of it. We give them a pity settlement type of thing. Oh, here's, $30,000 for the funeral. Here you go. Sometimes that happens. It just is really up to the family though. The families are really in charge in the civil cases, and that's why it is so important. That's why it's so different from the criminal cases. They direct the outcomes in the civil, whether it's probate, whether it's guardianship, conservatorship, things like that. They direct that outcome. Any questions on these so far? Anything on that? No? Okay. All right. All right, restitution. Who has been to restitution hearings or understands that, right? Okay, so can anyone tell me the difference between complete restitution and court-ordered restitution? Yes, there are both types in Utah. Hold on. You're going to talk a little longer this time.
Okay, this is just like a guess. I'm gonna say that the completed is anything that occurred from the incident, where court ordered would be more of like pain and suffering almost.
No, but you were right on the first half. So complete is the entire amount of anything expenses that occurred as a result of the incident. Court ordered, unfortunately, will often be based on ability to pay. And so they will say, hey, your complete restitution is $50,000. And in homicide cases, it's very large. And that's because you can ask for the lost wages of the person that has been killed. And then court ordered will look at it and they'll go, you know what, they're going to be in prison for the rest of their life. They're not going to be able to pay this. So we're going to order $5,000. And that's all that they have to pay in order to get onto or out of probation, that kind of thing. So that's the main differences between those. Then there's this little law here called preservation of assets. Now, who works in prosecutors' offices? All right, we got a few. I need you to remember this. This is a really cool law. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. But basically what it does is allows the government to put a freeze on any assets that are directly connected to the crime in order to pay for restitution. Pretty cool, right? When I ask prosecutors about this, when I go and train prosecutors, nobody knows about this law. And that's because it's hidden in the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. And most prosecutors aren't reading the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. Sorry, guys. So I love them, but they didn't read it. All right, presumptive death. This is a newer niche area of law. How many of you have cold cases where there's no body, but somebody's been missing and presumed either killed or at least dead now? Got a few in here. So did you know that in the state of Utah, after somebody is deceased for 5 years, you can get them declared dead? That's the law there. We will handle those types of cases. They may or may not be homicides because of how cold of a case that they are. But we will handle those. It's not a very hard process if the case is if they've been missing for over 5 years. And the reason for that is because the statute says if they've been gone 5 years, they're presumed dead. But sometimes we can do it beforehand, depending on the evidence. And the reason, can anybody guess the reason why we want someone declared dead? I know it's kind of weird, but assets, life insurance. Have any of you gone to the missingmoney.com or missingmoney.gov thing? There's a lot of money on there. And we have gone through, we partnered with the Utah Cold Case Coalition. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. There's Cold Case Foundation. There's the Cold Case Coalition. They're a little different. But the Utah Cold Case Coalition and us, We have gone through and searched basically every missing person in the state of Utah through that, and there are tons of assets of missing persons in there. One of them brought us over $30,000 for a woman whose daughter was missing, and so we were able to help get that for her by getting her daughter declared deceased. And so that's something that we do. We don't get a ton of those cases, which is fine. I'm not saying, hey, send them all over. And not everybody wants their loved one to be declared deceased after 5 years. We want to honor that, obviously, but sometimes it can help. Sometimes it even helps investigators, though, especially private investigators, because then they can go and get access to bank accounts and phone records and things like that that they normally wouldn't be able to get without some kind of declaration of being deceased. All right. So let's talk about the civil statute of limitations for murder. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit more about wrongful death, but I want you to know about this. So what is the statute of limitations for murder in criminal court? There isn't one. Oh my goodness. You are right. Now, can you guess what the statute of limitations is for civil actions? 4 years? Not right, so I didn't click it. 7, also not right. How long do you think your average, or prosecutor's office people, how long does the average homicide prosecution take in the state of Utah? 200, 3 to 5 years. Most of them are about 2 if it's a settlement. So would it be surprising that they only have 2 years to file a civil lawsuit? They don't have enough time to process all that. They've got the criminal case going on. And this is in most states, that's also in most states, but in Utah specifically, it is 2 years. And so we've got a cool new statute that we're going to talk about here. But basically it says, within 2 years, recovery for damages of death caused by the wrongful act or neglect of another. And so that civil statute of limitations starts clicking the day that the homicide occurs. And so you've got to file that within that 2 year time period. So the fix is Utah's example. And we're going to watch a little video clip here first for it.
But justice still evades those family of Rosie Harris. She was murdered by her partner in 2017. And earlier this month, Sue Mary Hickman was found guilty of manslaughter. But that's not enough for Harris's family. Behind every crime, there's a story, and the truth matters. Here's ABC4's senior crime and punishment correspondent Marcos Ortiz with the Justice Files.
Rosie Harris and Sue Hickman had a turbulent relationship, ending when Hickman killed her partner. In the aftermath, Harris's family is learning the law isn't on their side when trying to settle the estate.
Guilty of manslaughter, dated the 7th day of March 2019.
The evidence was stacked against Sue Mary Hickman.
Sue Hickman says, I shot her, I did it.
In a 911 call, Hickman admitted killing her partner, Rose Harris, in 2017. Harris's sister remembers getting a call from police.
I made him tell me repeatedly, is she really dead? Is she just shot? Is she dead? I can't believe this happened.
Earlier this month, Hickman was found guilty of manslaughter. The Harris family was hoping for murder. It happened in a Salt Lake City home, which the two women shared. And the Harris family is learning it no longer is Harris's. Her sister says she bought the home 10 years ago. Hickman moved in 2 years ago, and the couple both signed bank papers to refinance the home. It was sold after Harris was killed.
Sue ended up taking half of the profit of half of the equity that we sold the house for.
Harris's family tried to block the sale and distribution of the money, but the statute of limitations for a wrongful death lawsuit expired. An attorney for an advocacy group says that's not right.
We don't give victims the time they need to, number one, grieve, and
really
number
good.
two, go through a lengthy criminal trial.
He says Utah's legislature needs to change the law which lets families deal with a criminal trial first, and then once that's over, start the clock for any civil action.
They allow the victims time to process, time to heal. And many victims decide later, you know what, I still don't want to do a wrongful death, and that's totally fine, that's up to them. But at least give them the chance to wait and see.
My children miss her, my grandchildren miss her.
Losing her sister and then watching her killer profit from the sale of a home makes Palmer feel victimized again.
Heartbroken. angry, but mostly just so sad.
The attorney for Never Again Foundation says it's time to end this injustice for grieving families. He hopes lawmakers are listening. For the Justice Files, Marcus Ortiz.
All right. Marcos, as you can tell, calls me a lot. And so a lot of his cases are around here. So Utah now has a new statute of limitations, and this does not just apply to homicide cases. So I want you all to know this. This is great for any type of case with a crime victim, assault, rape, molestation, anything like that. And what it says is, we're gonna look into this two right here, basically says, notwithstanding any statute of limitations, the victim can bring a cause of action if the defendant was charged by criminal complaint, indictment, or information, and the cause of action is brought within 1 year from the day on which a final disposition of the criminal proceeding is issued. So what does that mean? It gives victims an additional 1 year clock from the day the criminal course or the criminal case ends, whether they're found guilty or not. And so let's say somebody is charged and the case is dismissed and the civil statute of limitations has run. This will give them 1 extra year because they were charged, even if it was dismissed. They were charged. And so that's all that is needed to revive that 1 year period. And so that's really important for not just homicide victims, but all crime victims. Let's see, but unfortunately, one big caveat, it doesn't go back in time to whenever it has to, the statute of limitations has to at least expire after May 4th, 2022. So unfortunately, we couldn't get it to go back in time. The legislature was a little bit scared about doing that after the lawsuit that happened with the statute with the molestation victims being able to kind of went back in time to continue to sue civilly. And that was overturned for specific reasons, but they didn't want to take the risk again of having something overturned. So this is a little bit different, and it will generally apply to all crime victims. So how can survivors prevent the killer from wasting assets that victims can receive in restitution or civil judgment? Probate is our #1 way. It's not within the wrongful death. And so probate is our #1 way, and that's because of the Slayer statute. Additionally, there is a wrongful death, there's preliminary injunctions, there's lots of special considerations to take into factor though. Most of which are that attorneys, even if they're not us, they're not a nonprofit group or whatever, they charge rates that are pretty high. Most of them charge contingency, so it's based off of a percentage. But some of them will still just charge very high hourly rate, and sometimes it's not worth it to try to go and get those assets because of the amount of time and money that will be wasted in trying to get that. So you still have to weigh the costs off that. Other special considerations are whether they have anything to collect. Most people will not have assets to collect, especially if they're going to be going to prison for the rest of their life or, for the next 15 years. So we're going to talk about probate and the Slayer statute. I know I've been building to this. Are you guys so excited? You want to know why? I wrote the last law too, in case I didn't make that clear. I also wrote this one. Super cool, right? Okay. So we're going to pull up the Slayer statute here. Everybody, oh, you guys can't see my screen. Let's see. How do I? Oh, look at that. Okay. Okay. So here's the Slayer statute. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so people can see. All right, can people see that? Yeah, okay. So first, within a Slayer statute is section 2. Now this was already in place. I can't take credit for this, but it models every other state really. Some states are really strong. I would say Arizona and Utah are probably the strongest. I'm going to be biased towards Utah because again, we just updated it. And I would say Texas and New Jersey are probably the weakest. And that is because in Texas, they only can't inherit life insurance. They can still get everything else. And in New Jersey, it's basically less than It's very hard to do that. And so it can be a little bit different for each state, but in Utah, the Slayer statute under section 2 says an individual who commits a disqualifying homicide of the decedent forfeits all benefits with all of these different things, and that's mostly just within the probate. And then if the decedent died intestate, meaning without a will, it passes as if the killer has disclaimed the killer's intestate share, meaning that they don't get their share. It also revokes any kind of will, power of attorney, nomination, and then it also severs the interests of the decedent and the killer held by them. And this is why in that last video, the person was able to get that half of the home. They had a joint tenancy, and so it's made it so they are not joint tenants, and it transforms it into tenancies in common. So what that means is they each have an equal share. And so the courts were correct in the probate, but the family, if they wanted to go after that other half, they needed to file a wrongful death or other asset. But because of this new area of law, there's a way to prevent those assets from being squandered. And let's go to, well, number 6 basically just says, hey, if we haven't covered anything, killers can't profit. But number 7 through number 9 is what's new and what unofficially, because they don't list civilians on here, what we wrote to make Utah's Slayer statute the strongest in the country. And what it says is that an interested person can petition the court to do a few things. First, to enter a temporary restraining order against the assets of the killer or the killer's estate. So that joint tenancy in common where the property was now half and half, you can ask the court to freeze the killer's assets, their half of it. You can also establish a constructive trust on any property of the killer or the killer's estate that is effective from the time of the second the trigger is pulled, the second that they killed that person. And what that does is it kind of goes back in time. So if they weren't, let's say they weren't brought to charges for a couple of years or even a few months, or even they were brought to charges right away, but they started getting rid of assets. This constructive trust can go back in time and grab all of those and put them back into place. So that way they're not wasted. They can also take any other action necessary to preserve the property or assets of the killer or the killer's estate. And the reason killer's estate keeps popping up is because of murder-suicides. So we want to make sure that those are covered there as well. So this interested person is important because they are not yet personal representatives. It can take us 6 weeks to 3 months sometimes to get hearings, to get someone appointed as a personal representative. And so we need to take action quicker than that. And this allows someone who has an interest in the estate of the deceased person or in the estate of the killer or the killer's assets to be able to ask the court to please freeze any of these assets. Basically, you just have to meet, if any of you have heard of temporary restraining orders, it just has to meet those same standards. And then section 9, that's not actually part of that. But yeah, so those two together. Oh, I did skip section 7. There was the interested person, in case you guys were wondering. So this is in the Slayer statute, which is in the probate code. So it's 75-2-803, in case you are wondering and are law nerds and you want to look it up. But this is where it talks about the interested person being able to get that. And again, that's why that is so important. And basically, when you get this person, the civil court bar is a lot lower than criminal. Does anybody tell me what the bar for criminal to find somebody guilty is? Beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Do you know what civil is? And we like to call beyond a reasonable doubt like 99.9999%, right? So what's it in civil? Preponderance of the evidence, right? And we like to call that 50.1 or 51, basically more likely than not. So they have a much lower standard here in the civil court. That's why when the families, the Brown and the Goldman family sued OJ, they won in the civil court, but he was found not guilty in the criminal court, and that's because they didn't need as much evidence to convict him. And so that's kind of what can happen here. And we want to make sure that within that probate case, that these assets are preserved, so that way the kids are really who are benefiting and people aren't improperly getting assets that they shouldn't be able to get. Any questions about the Slayer statute? Okay. We're gonna go and exit out of this. Maybe. No. Sorry for the unflattering view on Zoom right now, everybody. Okay. Okay. Okay, so here is another section. When we're talking about restitution, that's within the criminal court process, right? And over the last 2 years, a lot of headway has been made with restitution and giving victims the ability and power to collect on restitution. One of these is this statute right here called civil action by a crime victim. And let's see. Click on that. Move this back over here. All right, and this is a kind of a longer one, but we're going to go over the most important sections here. I'm going to. But basically it says, if you're guilty in the criminal court, you're automatically guilty in the civil court. So what does that mean? Do you know how long civil trials often take? Anybody guess? How long would a civil trial take against somebody, huh? Too long, that's mostly, but they're going almost simultaneously with the criminal court, and because the criminal courts want to protect the a person's right to be presumed innocent, a lot of these cases, civil cases, get put on hold almost right away because they don't want them to accidentally say something in the civil case that can be used against them in the criminal case. I would love that, but unfortunately, they have a right to protect their Fifth Amendment. And so basically what that says here is that if they are guilty in the civil, they're automatically guilty or guilty in the criminal, they're automatically guilty in the civil. And then all we need to do is a hearing just on the amount of damages that need to happen or the restitution that needs to be paid. So if the criminal court has already determined, hey, you owe this much in restitution, they can take that restitution and turn it into a civil judgment. So that way they can collect that way. And that's applying to any crime victim, not just homicides. Yeah. It does not, unfortunately, apply to no contest anymore. Well, not anymore, it hasn't. So if there is a restitution order, though, it does. But if there is not a restitution order and they're purely looking to go and get a civil action against the perpetrator for something that they've been found guilty of in the criminal court, it does not apply to no contest or misdemeanor Cs, which are usually traffic offenses anyway. Unfortunately, that was something that was snuck in at the last moment there. We tried to prevent it, but it just isn't. Basically, if you don't know what no contest means, it means that, hey, I don't think I'm guilty, but I agree that the state has enough to get me convicted if they really want to, which is just another way of saying I'm guilty. But kind of, yeah, it's very similar. Those are usually in like child cases, but yeah. Sorry, I keep hitting my head on this thing. Okay. Okay, this is the preservation of assets thing, and we'll just, like I said already, basically the prosecutors can ask the court to freeze any assets of the perpetrator as long as it is connected to the crime. So sometimes it's not going to apply, but sometimes it is. And this was severely limited recently by Supreme Court cases, the United States Supreme Court. So it used to just be any asset they could go and grab to make sure that it pays for restitution. But now it has to be directly connected to the crime. So if they were found with a bunch of cash that they went and stole from the victim, or went and withdrew because they were going to flee the country, that asset could be held in order to pay for the restitution. But if they just had a bank account over here sitting, or a car over here sitting that wasn't involved in the crime at all, likely the courts aren't going to allow that to be taken and held for restitution payments.
You're watching ABC4 News.
And welcome back. After someone is the victim of a murder, the family of the victim can continue to deal with the emotional and legal repercussions for years. Well, there's now a support group for such families. Joining us now to talk about it is Brandon Merrill, who's actually the founder of Utah Homicide Survivors. Thank you for joining us, Brandon.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, why start this group? What motivated you?
You know, I just saw that there was a gap in how we serve these victims and how we need to help them, because, you know, there's so much things that need to happen after someone has had a family member in their life been killed in a violent, tragic way, and they not only need therapy, they need legal resources, they need a lot of things. And so I was trying to create that one-stop shop for them to be able to come and do that.
Oh, I'm sure. And how do people in this group really help each other then?
You know, we started this new therapy group. It's all online. It just happened to coincide with Corona and everybody needing to go online anyway. But it helps reach out and create that support group across the state. It's so important to know that there's other people that are going through the same thing as you, and they help each other heal by being in this group together. And it's led by a therapist, and it is just super helpful for them to have that place to talk about everything that they're going through with people in similar situations.
Right. I mean, you do the news story, it's out there for a hot second, and then you're right, these family members are left to still deal with all these repercussions. Why is it so important, the services that you're providing?
You know, just like you said, it's out there in the news for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it disappears, and they're not getting the attention that they need anymore with it, and it's just super hard to get that help for them.
Okay, and lastly, we just want to know, how can people get involved? If those people sitting at home are watching, thinking, I can help here in some way, can you tell them how to get in touch?
Yeah, so basically you can visit our website, utahhomicidesurvivors.org. If you're looking for therapy resources, there's a support button. If you're looking for legal resources, there's legal resources button, and you can fill out the information there, and we'll reach out and provide anything that you might need that we can help with.
Right. Thank you so much again for your time today,
Yeah.
Brandon, and much needed resource for those families especially. Thanks again for your time.
Of course.
Okay, so as I'm closing up here, homicide-specific full-service program models do not exist in the United States, including us. We are not a full-service program. We offer group therapy, which Maria will talk about, but we don't offer individual therapy. We don't have other resources with that yet. We're hoping that eventually we'll be able to, but according to the National Center for Crime Victims, these full-service models are so needed. But until that can happen, we really need to rely on all of us working together to support these families of homicide victims, because they really do need a lot of services and a lot of help. The main thing that we do offer, like I said, is the homicide-specific peer support group and group therapy, as well as the legal. But unfortunately, without that individual therapy component, we are not considered a full-service program. But we do refer out to therapists that are trauma-informed, but even then, not all of them are, I hate to say this, good enough for our clients, and that's just because many of them don't deal with homicides on a regular basis where they understand how to help these people or how to not vacation in the trauma. That happens quite a bit, where they want to know all the details about the case, but they don't necessarily help the person that is needing it. Let's see. Lost the clicker. Okay, just real quickly as I wrap up again, our success in Utah. Currently, we have about 70 families and 100 different cases that we're helping. We have successfully recovered over $4.5 million for families over the last 4 years. And then we have therapy groups in English and in Spanish, and they just alternate weeks. Any questions about the legal processes before I hand it over to Maria? Online? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to turn you over to Maria, who will explain herself fully and bash me in the process as she usually does. yeah, if you guys have any questions afterwards, feel free. I'm gonna pass around a little sign-up sheet for people that might want. We have a couple different literatures that we like to give out, specifically our rack cards, and then this book called What to Do When the Police Leave. If you get these books or you're wanting them, please just make sure one per family. We get about 100 of them per year, and so we don't want to run out when they need it. But I will pass around sheets for people that want potentially to get these things, and we'll mail them out to you. So, all right. It's working.
Well, it's really good to see a lot of familiar faces in the to SWAVO. So he's introduced my name, and I've been working with Brandon we started talking about this group about 3 years ago, and it just so happened that it coincided with when the pandemic started. So people are like, oh, are you virtual because of the pandemic? And I'm like, no, just actually happened that way, because a lot of people have just tried to start homicide survivor support groups in Utah, and they've always failed because they've tried to do it in person and they've just not been able to find locations to do it in. So it was really fortunate that he and I kind of coincided and started volunteering at our family justice clinic. So my day job is at the Children's Justice Center in Utah County, and they help run the Family Justice Center. But today I'm wearing a different hat, so I'm happy to be here with you guys. I graduated with my MSW from Arizona State University in 2008. I have actually been assisting victims of crime here in Utah since 2003. So a lot of my time as an advocate with Utah County Sheriff's Office. And then I've been, as I just said, at the Utah County Children's Justice Center. And I'm just trying to keep up with Brandon. As you can see, he's very busy and he always wants me to do a lot of things. And I'm like, put the brakes on. I can only run so fast. So, but I'm so happy for the opportunity to do this and the privilege to be able to, work with the survivors. Sorry, I realized I could get emotional. But here's Becca. But it really is an honor to be able to be there and sharing their experience and see their healing and their growth and see what they do for each other. So I hope that today you guys can take something from this and grow and be able to improve things at your agency, or take back all the wonderful things that you are doing well at your agency and pat yourself on the back and go, oh, we're doing that really well. Which one do I click? Oh, there we go. And just know there will be a lot in here of like okay, this is not, this didn't go well, but it's kind of like the do this instead. Okay. So a lot of times what survivors need is they need to know what their own grief process is happening. Okay. What's going on, because a lot of times they're like, I feel crazy. What is happening to me? And as Becca said before, communication. Tell me what's going on. Answer my questions, right? Return my phone call. That's huge. Educate me about the system. A lot of times I think we get so used to being in the system that we think that people just know how this works. They really don't. They have no clue. Law and order does not tell them how this works, right? Empathy. Try to stand in their shoes a little bit. Think about if it was your child or your sister or your spouse that this happened to, and that's all you thought about every single day, and you just waited for an email back or a phone call back, and you just wanted an answer, or if all you wanted was their cell phone returned because their pictures were on there, And so being able to sit in that spot for a little bit, I think helps you go, you know what, yeah, I have nothing to tell them. There's no update on the case. You don't call them and tell them that. Say, I checked, there really is no update, but I'm here, I hear you, and I haven't forgotten you. I haven't forgotten your person. Communication's up there twice, because I can't tell you how many times I hear this from group members, is they don't call me back. I don't get an email back. Nobody's talking to me. Court's happening in 2 days and nobody's told me what's going to happen. Communication, that's really a lot of what they want. It's just talk to us, you know, so you don't get anything today, communication, big. I need water. So a lot of you know all the stages of grief, right? And how, oh, that's great, right? We go through these stages of grief and maybe we've tried to like teach our clients, the people that we work with, like, oh, this is what you might expect. When we're dealing with sudden and traumatic death, they don't really work, they don't fit. So there's another researcher, Janice Lord Harris, that did some more research with crime victimization, and she figured out that there's other things that occur. There's a lot of disorganization. You know, Becca talked about, like, I don't remember who else was there that night, only the person that left the card. Yeah, a lot of times it's like, it's all a blur. It's very much, I remember this, and this is very clear, but I don't remember anything else. You know, some memories are very, very profound, and then I have no idea what else has happened. A lot of times it's, you know, no, this isn't true. This isn't true. That's not my person. Or I don't believe this was just an accidental shooting. You know, I don't believe this was a homicide. You know, but what they told me, and they filter things different maybe than what they were initially told. And so then it's like on our end of things, on the professional end, it's like, no, I told them clearly this, but it didn't get processed on the other end that way. And so then they might be angry later on. They're like, they didn't tell me that. You're going, well, I really did tell them that, you know, but it's because there's too much shock happening. And so sometimes we can be kind of defensive as professionals, going like, I know I told them that, but we have to just take a step back and go, okay, this may be what happened, you know, just understand where they're coming from, that, you know, I was there, I know what happened, but you know what, things, you know, their whole world has just been shattered. You know, we talk about vulnerability. How many of you, I mean, we work in this world, so we know bad things can happen, right? But most people live kind of a carefree life, right? And how many of them expect that their loved ones, they're going to get a knock on the door 2 in the morning, or that their loved ones are going to be murdered? This is the completely unexpected thing that's going to happen to them. Their world comes crushing down. And so you can feel very vulnerable that if this is going to happen, then what else is going to happen to me? My world is no longer safe to me. Everything's out of control. And that can be very impactful for somebody. A lot of times too, you're going to see a lot of things that mimic clinical depression. And traumatic grief oftentimes will look like clinical depression. If somebody goes in to see a therapist, they'll diagnose them with clinical depression instead of understanding that they have, this is just really traumatic grief that we're working through, because they'll have physical illness, they'll isolate, they'll withdraw. You know, a lot of those things are going on, but it's traumatic grief that they're experiencing. Post-traumatic stress that's been going on for quite a while, that they're re-experiencing and re-traumatized from the death. They're re-seeing everything playing in their head, everything that's occurred. And also guilt. The what ifs. There's so much. What if I did this? What if I would have told them, no, don't go tonight? What if I was there? You know, what if all these other things? On the positive side, I did have a group member say, you know, I'm not going down that road though, because how many other times did I maybe stop him from being murdered because, you know, I kept him home because we did all these other things. Maybe he could have been murdered so many other times before, you know, but we did other things, you know, and so that was like a really interesting way to think about it. You know, the people that we work with, they're the experts on their own grief. You know, these researchers, they're great, but I learn more from the people about what they say in a group than anything else. So this is literally like the only slide that's from research. Everything else is from what people have said in group with permission. And so really, when it comes to stages of grief, these last terms are really kind of the terminology that's better to use is survivors, they readjust, reestablish, they accommodate to what their new world is. They finally acknowledge what it looks like. And it's not that you move on, you just accommodate to what it looks like now. You know, so, because they'll never, and somebody said in group last week, which was very profound, they said, I will never stop grieving because I'll never stop loving my person. And I thought that was pretty amazing, because it's true. Even if any of us have lost somebody to anticipated grief, I mean, we all feel the same way, right? Never going to stop grieving that person because I'll never stop loving them. All right, so group members, the term survivor kind of was like, that's a weird term. Like, you know, we use that in our world, but they're like, what? Maybe we're a co-victim, you know, maybe secondary victim, you know, they didn't like the terminology that we live, maybe we're thrivers, a victor. The term they liked was we're victim adjacent. I thought that was very clever. So a lot of times they refer to themselves in our group as we're victim adjacent, because we're not necessarily like a survivor. That sounds like you're surviving a homicide. So whenever I tell somebody I'm, you know, work with homicide survivors, they're like, so you mean somebody that like they were attempted to be murdered and you're helping them? I'm like, no, like the surviving family members. So victim adjacent is the terminology that our group came up with. So another thing is there's ways in which they're re-traumatized, and they refer to this as like picking a scab. Every time that the re-traumatization happens, you're just taking that scab off. And sometimes it's deeper and deeper. Okay. Again, I have this little note. Again, we're not casting blame on any one agency. This is just to learn, or any one organization. It's just, you know, this is ways in which it can or has occurred. So obviously, police, not always most sensitive. Media talked about that. We're gonna go into that a little bit more. Prosecutors, there's things that can happen there that's not most sensitive. Even victim advocates, you know, I've heard some not always great things in my group, and I'm like, there may be a reason, you know. Maybe their new family and friends pick that scab a lot too. Because you've heard the term everybody grieves differently, and it is so true. It's very true. And just being able to have some patience to allow everybody to have their own space to grieve is very important. We talk a lot about that because there's some that are like, I really wish my family member would come to this group. And it's like, you can't force somebody to get into therapy. You can't force somebody to come to a group. You can't force them to come to events or even want to talk about it, because there's some of these family members don't even mention that loved one's name ever again. It's like, I'm not even going to talk about it, like they don't exist, don't bring it up. And it's very painful for other people. It's like they don't exist. You know, so it's very difficult. And the community, maybe people have just forgotten about it, or they view the way that somebody died as unacceptable. You know, maybe there was something around it that was, you know, shameful, or it wasn't necessarily gang involved, but maybe it was wrong place, wrong time kind of situation. You know, and so people are like, they're less than, they don't look like the perfect victim, you know, and so maybe the media doesn't give it as much attention either. And maybe your employer is not necessarily as patient or as kind or as understanding, because the grief process is not quick, especially when you are going through the criminal justice process. I've often heard, it seems like their grieving is put on hold, and they're not even allowed to grieve until the process is like finished. And then you don't even know, are they able to grieve once sentencing has occurred? Yes. Okay, hold on, I got a question. I just realized I have to walk home.
I can do that.
Okay, so my question is, I work in a prosecutor's office and I work strictly on murder cases. And I know that a big thing, Becca mentioned it, is communication. I'm just curious, like, has your victims that you guys are working with, or your victims, survivors, have they mentioned like how often they want communication? I know it's kind of a case by case basis and they want that, but I also feel like that's really traumatizing if I call you after every court hearing or, letting you know what's going on. I'm just looking for feedback if you've had any of that information come through.
Well, obviously I cannot speak to everybody. Becca wants to say something. I'm very glad she's still here.
I would say communicating, so if they reach out to you, answer back. Because I think in the group, I was part of this group, and oftentimes that communication was we were reaching out and no one would answer and no one would call back. And something that my advocate did for me is she just sent a text, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk? And I could choose to or to not. And so a text goes a long way. So that always made me feel like they cared.
I really like that question because I think all of us are really worried that we're going to push that button. And by even communicating with them, we're going to pick that scab, right? But it's going on every day. The court is still happening. There's some people have talked about in group, they're like, I want to know what's going to happen in the court hearing. Don't want to know after court. I'd like to be prepared before. So lately it's been, I don't want to show up on the WebEx and just sit there for 30 minutes to an hour and then find out it was continued and nobody notified me. Yes, that's happened multiple times, and then they find out later and nobody let them know that it was continued beforehand. They're like, why didn't somebody tell me that it was continued? Because they revolve their vacations, everything in their life revolves around every single court hearing. Even in our world, though, we know it's just like a show up and it's just gonna schedule another hearing, to them, it's very important to be there for everything because they're representing their person. They're their flag bearer, and they want to be involved in everything. So a lot of times too, court days are really, really hard. Taking the scab again, no matter what you do, it's not going to help. But they are prepared for it. So they're like, I want to gear myself up. I want to be prepared as possible. Sometimes we can't anticipate what's going to happen in court, right? But there's a variance of possibilities, right? So calling ahead of time, if you're in a position that you work with a prosecutor that you can call and say, all right, the hearing's coming up and, this is the type of hearing it is, and these are some of the things that could happen at the hearing. That's really helpful. And if the family has like one spokesperson, then sometimes they can be like on a text string and they can be like text it out to the rest of the family. I've heard those kind of things helpful, and it's really good because then court day gets over and then they move on for the rest of the week. Then they don't have to like recover for multiple days after court. If what is it called when you go to state hospital, competency hearing. If the report's not in, that at least 24 hours in advance that the competency report is not in. You can let somebody know the day before, hey, it's not in, it's going to be continued. It's just really helpful to give somebody a heads up, a text, a quick little call, and then they're prepared. That's all the communication they need. So. When we did this presentation last year to the Parents of Murdered Children conference, most of them were survivors, family members, and I'm talking and they're all going like this, like the whole time. And I see Becca's head doing that. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm on the same page. All right. And, they're going to be re-traumatized no matter how hard you try. So just inform them. Don't, it's again, information is better than having them wonder what's happening. Just like Becca said, I'd rather know kind of exactly what it is, even if it's hard to hear, than imagine or find out when I'm sitting there in court.
So I also work with homicide survivors and stuff. I think that it's really important to give them those options as well. Let them know, like, you can attend any hearing, but you also don't have to attend anything.
I will let you know what's gonna happen, and I will also let you know what happens afterwards too. It's entirely up to you, because once they had somebody knocking on their door, or calling their phone, all those options were taken away. And those options are important.
I really like that. Yeah, because you're doing ahead of time, like, what do you want? And you can change your mind at any time. Yeah. Yeah, I can't handle the WebEx links anymore, don't, please stop sending them. I've asked group members who, we have a lot of people that we send the links to, and I'm like, I know you're not coming, do you want me to still send them to you? Yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, they're just making sure. As somebody actually, they unwired their doorbell because they couldn't have anybody ring their doorbell anymore after they were notified by the police. Because it was so traumatizing, they're like, I can't hear the doorbell ever again. So. All right, so, our criminal justice system has focus, and many agencies, it's really hard for them to center their operations around homicide survivors. That's why we have Utah Homicide Survivors, so that we could try to help focus in on some of those gaps in services and help them understand things and, okay, this is where you go and this is what you do. And a lot of times then we try to explain what's happening, and they experience a lot more trauma when they have unmet
Okay, I think we're back.
Yes, I can try to test this. Can people hear us online now?
Works. All right.
It works. Good.
Oh, we double check if C even wants to unmute.
See, Caitlin, do you have questions?
No,
I need to-
I was just saying that we can't hear, but that's fixed now, so thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I will say, my biggest complaint that I get from clients is that timeline expectation is not given or accurate in homicide cases. Whenever I meet with clients initially, I always tell them, expect a minimum of 2 years before the conclusion of the case. And then they are a lot less, and I tell them, hey, every 6 weeks, there's gonna be a hearing. Majority of the time, it's gonna be canceled or continued. And then they're not disappointed or mad when it happens over and over again.
Oh, we've had, I usually say 3 or 5. We had,
I
you know,
think 2 years for it.
he says 2 years for
Plea agreement.
a plea agreement, okay. Well, we had some new members join, and it was really helpful because the previous members educated the new members. I usually let the current members do all the talking to talk to them, because they say it in a much better way than I would. I believe that they really speak to their hearts better. And so it's really cool to see them explain the criminal justice system to others. And so they kind of explain, because the new people come and they're like, well, yeah, this was caught on video. It's very clear. They admitted to it, you know, basically, oh, wash and dry case, right? And it was kind of like the reality check that the other members are like, well, you know, the court process can be really frustrating in the first hearing, you know, they might reschedule it, you know, some things, and here we are more than a year out and no resolution, right? And the new members of group were like, really have this whole time just said, really appreciate you guys for helping prepare us for this. It's made this process so much better knowing that what we were up against, you know, because you all have been through it, you get it. We hear that over and over again, you get it. And same, you could imagine like some of the smaller organizations that do not get a homicide very often, it's like they get one every like 5 or 10 years. You know, they probably throw all their resources into it and they get lots of attention. And so then when you hear the difference in service, you're going, well, that's wonderful, but that's not reality when it comes to, you know, the Wasatch Front, you know, and unfortunately, but you know, everybody tries to do what they can to meet all the demands and do the communication. So try to tell group members, all right, let them know this is what you need. Just like, you know, this lady was talking about over here, you know, please let me know if you want to be notified before and after, and we'll follow through with that.
As well as like, if you run into a roadblock, reach out to me, you know, and these resources, if you can't get a hold of anybody, call me, I'll make it happen.
She said, if you run into a roadblock and you need resources, call me and I'll make it happen. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, because that's part of advocacy, right? I may not like know all the answers, but call me because I know the overseeing of the whole system. And I'll know who you can call, or I know where you can go for this. It's not clicking.
Oh, it's because we clicked off because of when we were doing internet things. Okay, try again.
All right, so we're gonna just have a few little examples. Police, so we talk about the not so compassionate death notifications. Those that do not occur through proper channels like the media, or maybe they pick up the phone and they call them on the phone to notify them. That's not a fun death notification to somebody. And do I have to go over here to click on things?
Oh, do you want me to click on
Yeah,
this?
lack of access to details. This is kind of our quotes from our group members. So this is a mother whose son was killed. She said, when the detective asked me to try a Facebook page, that was the first time I felt like I had any involvement. That was 18 months after the murder, 18 months to learn what happened. Wow. Because there was no information, then we go back. So just no detail about what had happened. That was a year and a half after her son was murdered, and she had no information. They kept everything from her. You know, just zero involvement. You know, sometimes it's just give me some information, help me know what's going on. You know, I know you're busy, but this is my son. This is my person. This is my role. This person is important to me. You know, and there's some people that are very, very kind and they're like, I want to like leave you alone and like let you do your job and I want to be respectful. And so, okay, I won't bother you. I won't bother you, you know, and maybe I'll just like send an email like once a month. And, you know, is that like too much, you know? And they don't want to bug the police, you know, and then all of a sudden they're like, all right, I'm gonna start a Facebook page. And then all of a sudden they're getting information coming in. They're like, that happened and that happened. Oh my goodness, they're just getting way too much information. Like, why didn't I find this out about this through the investigation? Why am I finding it out through Facebook? But then online people won't hear you if you yell.
I was just wondering if, a lot of times the reason why people don't get information is because the police can't release the information.
Yes, and that was discussed as well. Yes, and while like that was discussed with this person, this is, you know, a very old case. It appeared later that they stopped investigating after like 6 months. So.
And sometimes they find out through news articles. So if the news knows, they can know.
Well, and oftentimes, like, I think the family wants to feel trusted with information. They do not want to damage the investigation at all. They don't want it because they want the killer found. They want somebody brought to justice, you know, but they want some information, you know, keep me in the loop somehow about what you're doing. Just don't ice me out, you know, don't not respond to me, you know, and so that's sometimes the answer that they get, but sometimes it gets to the extreme. Again, communication, you know, as long as they know that it's being worked on, that they haven't been forgotten, I think is the important part here. A mother whose son was killed would have been nice to have police contact me. They only called to tell me my son was in the hospital or returned one of my calls. So that's how she found out. And then the media. So, you know, our news coverage, they might not be culturally responsive about what's happening. Overly sensational or completely inaccurate. Those of us who worked with law enforcement have been on the investigative side. We've been on that side of things and we watch the media and then we're going, oh, it's not true. That's not true. And you're just burning up inside because you're like, oh, the family, that's not what's going on, you know, and you just have to sit and wait and you're like, oh, the media is putting just lies and sensationalism out there because they're talking to a neighbor that has nothing to do with the family, you know. Film, social media portrayals of the homicide that survivors perceive in a negative light, you know, all those lovely cable TV shows, you know, that because they want, you know, we want to watch our murder porn, you know, because it's so exciting. And it has a new meaning now to family members because now it's their family member that's been killed. You know, like TV shows like Snapped, you know, it's all of a sudden it means something different. You know, it looks different when you're watching those things and you're like, they're exploiting somebody's family and their worst loss that they've ever had. And they're making it into entertainment. You know, and so some people that have been in group too, they're like, I used to watch that. And now it just is something completely different to me. All right, family, how they're re-traumatized by other family members. I guess I
went backwards.
there. some of the family relationships can be destroyed. This is really important for people to understand that they do grieve differently and to help them through this process, because can be a high rate of divorce, especially with a child that might be murdered. Because one people might be champion for justice and the other one might be like, I just want to move on and be quiet about this. Or somebody might be like, I'm gung ho for gun rights now. And the other person might be like, no, let's just stay out of all this, you know? And so people are reacting to it differently. Taking sides about what's happening.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Isolation, because there might be a stigma about it, about the specific homicide that happened. About the community members do not know how to respond. This is a mother whose son was also killed. She hated it when people would say, you need to find a way to move on. Or the professionals would say it, you need to find a way to move on. You know, if their case isn't solved, you need to find a way to just move on. You know, and that really hurts. You know, you see people on the news who have 50-year-old cold cases and they're still fighting to find their person. They don't move on. This doesn't happen. You know, if it was your person, you wouldn't. That's the empathy that we need to hold inside, is you wouldn't move on either. Employers are patient with the grief. So I'm going to read like a little bit of snippet of some of the email. One of the members of the group was like, please share this so that we understand how employers might not be sensitive.
It's like, there we go.
All right, so the boss, his email says, any reason why you were late to work? The response, I understand I am late. I'll be sure you show, I show you the same sympathy and compassion when your spouse is murdered or children are gunned down on the way to class, because there's never any rough times after that. The boss says, don't keep leveraging that. That is no excuse for showing up late and leaving early. I believe this was like 3 months after his spouse was murdered. The boss says, try to get some help with opening and closing your late spouse's business if that is a reason why you are late to work. And the response is, I am not involved in the daily operations of that business. I am glad you think I have that low of character to hide working a second job using a murdered spouse as an excuse. The boss says, sorry, did not mean to suggest that. Trying to help with your situation. Response, I will be taking Tuesday off. I have grief counseling at 3 p.m. paid for by the state, not our benefits. And I wouldn't want to leverage my husband's murder again just to leave early for grief counseling. I'll also see about getting some sleeping pills. I wouldn't want to leverage my husband's murder to be late to work when I am up all night on an anniversary of his murder. So, which I think this, I don't know that maybe that was a little closer to time, but reflecting back, he was like, yeah, I was really angry. That was not the most appropriate response to my boss. You know, he's like, I don't work there anymore. But also, like, there you go, you know, just people not understanding, you know, not getting it, because maybe they come from a place too where they've only been through anticipated grief. And they're like, I wouldn't be late to work, you know, I wouldn't be up all night. But it's like they don't understand violence and traumatic death the same way. You know, people they just shut down, they're not able to function. So when he's like, yeah, that really wasn't my best light how I responded. But people just don't show their best sides, you know, when they're going through something like this.
You have notes right here.
So a couple of the things that aren't showing up in here, but there's notes. One person had their house cleaned before the survivor had a chance to go in and see what they wanted to keep. So they just threw everything in the apartment out. Another person, this is for community or family, telling the survivor that they understand how they feel. And then a lot of people stop caring after the first wave.
All of that, I understand how you feel. Just take that out of your vocabulary. That's, I mean, even in group, I mean, them sometimes saying it to each other, but they really don't even say that to each other, you know, because nobody really can understand how anybody else feels, because nobody's loss is exactly the same as somebody else's. So it's kind of almost painful to hear it for many of them, because they're just doing it and they're like, no, you really don't, because you haven't been through this, or you don't have this, or this, or this going on. You know, so it's kind of a slap in the face when you say something, when somebody says something like that to them. Maybe lack of empathy or compassion from a prosecutor. Click on that lengthy and complicated court process. A different mother whose son's killed. Victims have a right to a speedy trial. What is the definition of that? We were told that waiting 2 or more years for a trial is the norm. We then experienced hearings to see if you're ready for the next hearing, and many postponements, which continues to open up wounds over and over again. No urgency for jury trials. Courts just barely moved to the yellow phase June 3rd, 2021. Schools figured out how to be in session. George Floyd's trial was held and televised, and within a year of his death. She's pretty upset about that, because she's like, why can all these other things happen? Why is my son's trial not being held, which was scheduled before COVID? And it's hard to see other things being able to happen, but your person's not taking priority. You know, it's really hard to watch. Lack or late communication. I think we've talked about that. Found out how my daughter was killed from the news. The prosecutors didn't call me before they filed charges. As we know, when charges are filed, that often triggers more news media. And so finding out information from the news is really painful. So if you ever know anything that's going to hit the media, giving a heads up is really awesome. Victim service providers. So navigating the justice system, that when they don't have adequate knowledge or assistance, they don't really provide empathy or compassion, not referring them to other resources in a timely manner, so they don't really know. And there are a lot of times they hear, I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have known about that service a year ago. I wish I would have had that information in the beginning. And maybe it was provided, but they weren't reminded because they were just in such a headspace that they couldn't have, it wouldn't sink in. So that's what happens in a lot of follow-up. Maybe taking sides of different family members. That's hard too when you have there's divorced or splintered family, and maybe service providers only working with one side and not another side. That gets tricky, especially if you have an office where you're really down people and you don't have okay, this advocate's going to work with this person and this one's going to, that gets really, really tough on our end of things to be able to help somebody. But then it can also look like, oh, they're only going to help my ex-husband, and they're only going to help that side of the family. They're not giving me any information. It can be interpreted that way. Vacationing in the victim's trauma. So this is a sister of a homicide victim said, the first therapist I had just kept asking me details of the court case and method of death. She wasn't interested in helping me. It was like I was talking to a true crime podcast host. And that's partly why when we ask Becca to speak, we're like, don't focus. You don't need to focus on the story of what happened. We're more interested in your experience, because everybody wants to know the details. It's so, sensationalized, and again, it's like ripping the scab off every single time you sit and tell the story. Even group nights, they say, while it's good and it's helpful, it's kind of like taking the scab a little bit, because they're like, I have to go back to that place, but they're like, but I need it. But group nights can be hard too. And here we go, how they felt supported. Let's get to the good stuff, okay? All right, in-person death notification, so click on that. The UHP officers who did the notification were at my home from 3 a.m. until almost noon. I know this isn't always realistic, okay? But they took the phone and spoke with my relatives. I called to be there. They were there as people arrived. They answered questions and gave information as an authoritative source, so I didn't have to answer questions in shock. Because can you imagine when you're having to retell this story over and over and over again? I recall, giving death notifications and staying there with the family and saying, is there somebody we can call? Do you need us to call anybody else? Oftentimes they wouldn't take us up on that, but it was like, all right, who can we get here? A neighbor, a friend, what other support person can we get here that can be in charge of doing those things? If it's not going to be me, Who else can we get here to do this for you? You know, and ongoing timely investigative updates, in-person meetings with prosecutors, that's huge. Being able to have that opportunity to meet a prosecutor in the early stages and be like, this is my person, and they call them by name, you know, and they're like, I'm here. I'm here for your sister. I'm here for you, but I'm really here for your sister. That's what I'm here for. That means something. Returning calls, click on the open communication involvement with the process. While there has been frustration at the pace of the process, open communication from the prosecution has made it bearable, and they make a point that I feel heard. Like, you know, they know it's not gonna be easy. They know it's hard, but they're like, this is bearable because they talk to me and they let me know what's going on. And the support group. The homicide support group was the best thing because I needed to know that I was not crazy and others in my situation felt like me. Someone else said support group has been extremely supportive. I'm grateful for this group. They get it. Now, a lot of people, they would try to go to other groups or get other group support and they're like, it just never felt like it fits, you know. They were just like, I just never felt like I belonged anywhere else because nobody else was experiencing anything similar to this. Because it was like, I'm still reliving this death and trauma. It's never ending. Every single day, it's like, it's happening over and over and over again. And when they came to group, it was like, oh my gosh, these people get it. You know, they know because they're all living in the same hell that I am. Sometimes there is social media that does provide support. And, you know, and there's been a lot of wonderful things that victim advocates have responded. There's some that they text them and they're like, hey, I have this information. This is what's going to happen in court. And they're just like, awesome. And sometimes they're like, I can text my advocate and they'll respond just like that. You know, and they're like, I'm respectful. I don't text her all the time. It's like only when court's coming up do I text that advocate. They're like, it's just helpful knowing that they're there to answer my question. When prosecutor and teams work together, the reparations program has been huge to help pay for, you know, funeral, burial expenses. That's been really great. And they said the UOBC has been wonderful to be able to respond to them with all of their questions. You know, we've gotten wonderful response for that. And then when they've had really patient and supportive family and friends, you know, it's kind of like you hear the thing, look for the helpers, you know, try to focus on the people that are there to support and listen. And communication. I don't know, have I said communication? Not enough. Grief does not end at sentencing. It's kind of just moving on to a different chapter. Sometimes it's like, maybe I can actually start grieving for real at this point. I don't know, right? Right, you know, sometimes you don't know what it is. Maybe they need healing from the process because the process of this is so traumatic. You know, what they've been through. And then they also might feel a loss of these professional relationships. They've had so much to do with all of us that they might, you know, it's not like they're gonna sit and like hang on to us for a while. You know, they're like, well, I'm done talking to the prosecutor. But it's like, what do I do now? I don't have another court date set. You know, and it's like, I don't want another court date set, but now what does my life consist of? You know, what does that look like? You know, who am I now? What do I need to do? The group members, one of them brought to group, because we talk about triggers all the time and, you know, what happens and what do we do when we have triggers? Well, somebody brought to group, they heard it on, they said, I watched it on like Good Morning America, but somebody said, these things called glimmers. And when you see a glimmer that reminds you of your person or something that makes you feel good, you know, and it just kind of goes, oh, that's really nice. And so she said, so I think at the end of group, we should end group with glimmers from the week. And I was like, great idea. Really, group has become what they want. I have not been like, all right, we're having a lesson today and we're going to do this. It has been what they want and we've shaped it around what they need. So we end it with glimmers, you know, so that we don't end it on a really sad note. So it's like, what are some glimmers for the week? And sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with their person, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it's, you know, I was at the 5K run And it was at the very end of the run, and I saw someone in front of me, and they had a walk just like my sister, and her hair was up in the bun. And I was just like, oh, it's just like my sister, you know? And instead of it being triggering, it made her feel really good, you know? Or they go someplace that reminds them of their loved one, you know, happy memories, things that bring good feelings up. You know, instead of always being painful, because they want their loved one to be not remembered for how they died, but for all the good things about them. They want them to be present, and they want the professionals to know who they are too. So, you know, sometimes, I mean, you guys are doing a lot, but sometimes it doesn't hurt. It's like, what did they like to do? Who were they? You know, and that's really touching to them for you to like show any little bit of interest. It's like, oh, you want to know who my person is? Because they show up at court and they have their picture of their person, because they want the judge to know. They want the jury to know. They want everybody to know, this is my person. And I love them. They were important to me. And I want them to be important to you.
That's all, for that, I was just gonna make it the announcement, or you can make this.
So, are there any other questions? Oh, I'm so sorry. I felt like it's Brandon's fault.
We have 3 minutes left, okay?
And so on September 25th every year is the National Day of Remembrance for Homicide Victims. And this year is going to be a little bigger. It's going to be quite quiet, but this year we're going to do something much bigger. And actually who is organizing it are the members of our group. They are organizing it. And instead of it being very somber, they wanted to do it, you know, let's remember the life of our loved ones. Let's make it more of a happy event, not like we're doing like big fiesta kind of thing, but they want to make it like a celebration of their life. Let's remember the wonderful things they did. So, it's on September 25th. And yes, there'll be candlelight vigil. There'll be like a moment of silence, but there's also going to be music. And so here's our flyer. And so we have Ryan Ennis as someone in the group might be married to Ryan Ennis here. So we're glad that he agreed to do this for us. And so he'll be wonderful. And we have a choir coming and we have somebody speaking as well. And it'll be really great. So if you want to come out for the evening and come up to the Capitol, it will be good. Question?
The time and the app.
Oh, yeah. Find an address on the flyer.
You can also go to our Facebook page, Utah Homicide Survivors, and it'll be there too, so.
But yeah, September 25th.
September 25th at the Capitol in the evening, so. Or it'll be in the flyer information, so. So memorial photo garden, live music, speakers. So. All right, any other questions? I'm sorry we kept you till 5. Thanks for being patient. I know it's a long day, so.
Thank you very much. All right, and thank you all for being here. Please drive safe. Apparently there's rain coming here in a little bit, so from like 6 to 8 it's supposed to rain, so enjoy that. And next SWAVO will be December 8th in Salt Lake City, so see you in December.